Hello, I'm Trevor Boland, and welcome to week 3 of the AHEAD Online Conference 2020. There's a team of communities of learning and study abroad. So first of all, we've got Trevor Vaugh from Maynooth University, and he'll be introducing himself in just a few moments. Then we've got Hannah Kelly from AHEAD, who will be talking about inclusive mobility. And again, she'll be online introducing her talk. And then from America, we've got Dr. Suzanne Ehrlich and Michelle Bartlett, all the way from North Florida. And they'll give a talk as well about UDL within their institution. So the first talk by Trevor will be about 10 minutes long. The second one will be about 20 minutes, and the third one will be about 20 minutes again. So between each talk, we'll have a brief Q&A time, and then at the very end, we'll have a longer Q&A time. So if you just bear with us, we will try and address questions that arise mostly towards the end, but we might encapsulate those between the presentations. Okay, so if I can stop sharing my screen. I'm going to hand you over to Christine Hines right now, and she can introduce herself.
Thanks, Trevor. Hello, everybody. It's great to see you on the chat because I can't physically see you, but hoping and looking forward to a really engaged session, and that you engage lots with the conversation and some of the concepts that are brought up during the session. So I'm the project coordinator with AHEAD, and everything that was running for the physical event, myself and Trevor would have been organising over the last while, and now we have managed to get changed into this wonderful 10-week webinar, which I think is going relatively well. Would you say, Trevor? You know, it's going really, yeah. Your mic is muted, but I think you're enthusiastic. Your face is telling me you're enthusiastic.
Well, I've learned an awful lot. I'm still
Yeah.
kind of going back to our two keynote speakers from the first week.
Oh, they
I
were
find,
fantastic.
yeah, just they were so good. So that community to practice piece, and as well about UDL and disability services, like Frederick Fauvet, his experience is so wide, he touches off so much.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot to think about in these sessions, yeah, which is great.
Definitely is, yeah. And I suppose we just want to also thank the HEA. You know, they've been phenomenal in supporting us through the physical event and through a lot of our work. So, you know, they are our core funders. So thank you very much to the HEA, any of those that are listening. And I just wanted to also just briefly, if you don't mind, just bring your attention if there's any FET practitioners or learners out there or that you're connected to. We have launched just yesterday a survey for both a separate survey for learners and a separate survey for FE practitioners that are both on our website. And if I can just briefly just show you where it is on our website, if that's okay, Trevor. You can just fill it in. They both take about 20 minutes, and we just want to get an idea of how you're doing, how it's impacting you, and how we can best support you going forward. So as well as the webinar series, we want to see what else we can do. You know, we're developing resources all the time. We're feeding up to government response teams. So we just want to have the best information, and that comes from you. So I'm just going to briefly just show you where it is on our website. So I don't know if you can see that there. But if you just look on the right-hand panel, I don't know, Trevor, can you tell me if you can see it? Yeah, perfect.
Yep.
So if you just want to look on the right-hand panel there in the news and events column, the second one down, and then the second one, or the one after that, is basically just learning from home student survey. That's our learner survey. And then the one below that, AHEAD survey on the impact of COVID-19 for FET practitioners. That's our FET practitioner survey. So just if you get a chance over the next while, I know some people are on Easter holidays or have a lot of things going on, but you know, help us help you. And if you want to give us 20 minutes of your time to fill that in, that would help us. Or if you know of someone that would be able to fill that in, that it might be relevant to, if you could share it with them as well, that would be phenomenal. So thank you so much. I think I'm just going to stop sharing now, and I'll let Trevor take over, and I'll be helping out in the background as much as I can. So thank you very much, everybody. Looking forward to the session.
Super. Thanks, Christine. Thanks a lot for that. And so first of all, we're going to have Trevor Vaugh. So Trevor, if you just come online and just switch on your camera and your mic. Great. Trevor, thanks very much. Thanks a lot for doing this. So Trevor Vaugh is from Maynooth University. So Trevor, can I just get you to introduce yourself to the crowd?
Yeah, this isn't going to take some of my 10 minutes, is it, Trevor?
What? Like, yeah, no, we'll allow this time, and yeah, give you the 10 minutes then to present.
Thanks, I was
Okay.
nervous about that. Hello, everybody. My name is Trevor Vaugh, and I'm a lecturer in Maynooth University. I lecture in product design, but I also am the PI of the Maynooth University Innovation Lab. So that's, again, it's a HEA-funded lab. So the Higher Education Authority of Ireland funded my lab to look at education maybe through new eyes, through creative eyes, identify problems and use a design thinking approach to tackling some of the challenges it's facing today and into the future. And I guess the funding arose and my lab arose from my work with the Access Office in Maynooth. We did some work on transition programs for students into the Access program, and we saw how valuable design was in that area, and a lot of our work today still continues to work with the Access Office.
Okay, Trevor, thanks very much for that. And feel free just to share the presentation right now. And as you're doing that, we'll just ask the crowd just to get ready. It just takes a few moments just for that screen to become available. So feel free to type any kind of comments into the chat box, so you should be able to see that. And then the Twitter handle is #ahead2020. So I will just turn off my mic.
Okay, I think we're good. This is very strange. So hello again, Trevor Vaugh. As I said, I'm the principal investigator of my lab. And this presentation is, it's probably outdated now, so it was created before COVID-19, but I'm hoping some of the things I'm going to talk about and some of the ideas will still be relevant, and maybe even more so. So I guess I've always believed that innovation is important in higher education. I've been lecturing for the last 7 years, and as someone who came from the innovation world outside of education, I could see a lot of industries were moving rapidly forward, but education didn't seem to be as progressive as many others. So I think more than ever we should be and are looking at change and innovation in higher education. For the purpose of this, I'm going to talk about innovation as very simply, it's significant positive change, and that positive is related to human beings, to the people using our system. So that's the students, the staff, and the human element of it. Yes, the machine part of it, the processes and the systems are important, but we believe that starting with the humans is the most important. So as I started out, we were funded last year by the HEA as part of their innovation and transformation program. And I guess we set up with the goal of merging human-centered design and education, because we really believe that can be a force for change. We've three guiding principles, if you like, or activities. That is to harness the collective intelligence and creativity within the education system. We know that creativity is there, but sometimes it's hard to bring it together. We are identifying and defining unmet needs within the system and using very creative experimental techniques to test and validate them. And then finally, we're doing a lot of exploratory design research to explore how we can actually evolve the system to meet the needs of today and tomorrow. So, yeah, I always feel a bit guilty picking on education, but the one thing that really struck me is how little we've changed as an industry. So the picture on the left is from 1088. It's the University of Bologna, the first university formed. And the picture on the right is any university, any higher education institute today. And they're identical. It's still rows and rows of people with a person at the top and lots of students down the back. And for me, that kind of was a little bit worrying, because it's the exact same method of production as we used 600 or 700 years ago. We're also seeing, we're still dealing with the same people. The problem is they're living in a completely different time. And are we really evolving what we're doing to meet the needs of the time? Does it still work, the approaches we use, or can we do something a little bit different? And we have our academics, same forces are acting on them. They're doing the same job. They're researching, they're doing admin, they're teaching, but again, nothing has really changed. We might have added new technology, but fundamentally, it's the exact same thing we've always been doing. I like to use the metaphor of an operating system. The operating system we use in our institutes are, it's old. It's about 600 years old. And if you think of any operating system, like a computer operating system, its job is to be the interface between the people and the machine itself. And if that operating system is old, then you start running into problems. And one of the problems is if you start putting more users in that operating system. So in Ireland, we have record numbers. We have 230,000 students currently in higher education, and we have a staff of about 25,000. And that's a year-on-year growth for the last 15 years of about, I think 10%, something like that. And so now we've got a very old operating system, and we've got lots of new users using it, and it's a very complicated user base. When you have an operating system that's old with lots of users, you start getting error messages. Before 2 weeks ago, these are the kind of error messages we were getting in Ireland. So a lot of mental health difficulties, quality of education, lack of funding, and lots of talks about crisis. So these are the pop-ups that you get in your browser saying that the operating system is struggling. And do not adjust your computers. This is what happens. Our system crashes. And up to 2 or 3 weeks ago, I felt, and lots of people felt, that higher education was pretty close to this. 2 weeks ago, we had this, but fortunately, the staff of our institutes have reacted in an incredible way. I love this quote by Michael Barber. He used to be the Prime Minister's delivery unit head, and he was McKinsey's global head of education. His fear was that our institutions' risk aversion, timidity, complacency were going to come together to stop universities growing and responding to what he called an avalanche coming. 2 weeks ago, that avalanche did come. And so in my lab, we know and we trust technology is going to help us with some of the problems, but we actually believe that it's going to be social technology that will actually deliver the quality of experience and the agility that higher education needs. And we'd like to think of design as a social technology. I'm not going to read this quote by Liedtka, but I can share the paper with you. But she talks about design thinking, accelerating how we innovate, empowering everybody within the system to become innovators, and allowing them to overcome cognitive biases to transform and reconfigure resources. So the process we use is a very standard one in design circles. I've used this for years and years. We call it the double diamond. Not very imaginative, but it's quite powerful if you work through the double diamond. So you'll see two spaces. You have a problem space, which is on the left, and a solution space on the left. The problem we found is that lots of kind of initiatives that come out of companies and universities start in the solution space with lots of assumptions about what people actually need, but very little understanding of what people actually need. So the design process starts on the far left-hand side with a general challenge. That can be anything, but we go through a discovery process. So we, excuse me, we draw from anthropology, we draw from sociology, and we find and understand the people we're trying to help. Then we can start defining what the problem is. And in the middle, we have it's a big moment. It's framing the question that we're going to answer. When we frame a specific problem, then we can start brainstorming. So that develop phase is about coming up with ideas to meet the problem. And then the final section is to explore and prototype and experiment and validate what we've come up with. And so the process, it's a journey, it's a community journey. So it's not a one person or one team of executives coming together. It's bringing the students and the people affected by the problem together to define it, to understand it, to come up with the ideas and work together on that journey. One of the key parts of the way we work, and it's summed up nicely here by a friend of mine, Kat McCauley, who's the head of design for the Scottish Government. Sometimes we try to come up with innovations and solutions to fit everybody. But what we find in design is that the insight is actually held at the extremes of our university. It's the people with amplified needs. So it's the people who are coming through our access programs. Well, if we work with them and understand what they're going through and come up with solutions that help them, more than often, nearly every time, the solution that works best for them actually works better for everybody. And so it looks a little bit like this. So we work in the extremes. That's where we get the insight. Once we have the insight, we create solutions, then we can test and validate it with the majority of the community. And drawing from design thinking, from user-centered design, from our own experience with the people who we found easiest to work with and most helpful, we've created a number of principles that we gauge the projects we're working on, and even gauge the people who we're going to work with. And this is, I suppose it's our mission to embed these mindsets or principles across the university. And we're going to be publishing information and tools and techniques within all of these, which we can share at a later date. But it's, number one, it's centering on people's needs and goals, not the system. We believe in bringing different disciplines together because the innovation happens there. Intellectual humility is a force for change. So that's questioning the assumptions we all have about how things should be. Co-creation, curiosity, building to think, so building prototypes to test early and often. Getting very comfortable in ambiguity. That's a key trait of design. It's because that's where you find the answers. If you rush to solutions too quickly, you're going to miss out on a huge amount of opportunity. And then communicating creatively to inspire action. So some of the tools we use: contextual inquiry, design ethnography, think aloud protocol. Within ideation, we create personas of the people we're trying to help. We frame the challenges that we're working on, and then we work with students and academics and all sorts of people in the same room to come up with those ideas. And then we create prototypes to experiment and inspire and get buy-in from leadership. It's much easier to get buy-in from the dean or from someone, even the president, if they can actually see something working and can understand what you're talking about. We do a lot of experimental research. This is a really simple, neat experiment we did recently, where we asked students to tell us what inspired them to enter higher education, but through an object, because it was easier to articulate. And you can read that later on. I could see Trevor looking at me.
No. I have to say the work is absolutely brilliant. I've gone through the presentation, and having a design background myself, I really appreciate the level of design process in the work and that idea of working collaboratively to come up with solutions. I think not only does it exist in design, but it's great that even in yesterday's webinar that we had, that idea of communicating, collaborating, and trying to find solutions to kind of problems, that can only be really done through design thinking and people from different walks of life coming together and trying to figure out kind of a gap and trying to kind of address that. So I think this current situation we're seeing that happen in education with like reasonable accommodations with students with disabilities. People are just having to rethink how they're going to support students individually. We're also seeing just online teaching and learning has kind of become something that is just like, whether it's the short-term norm or the long-term norm, that's a whole different question, but it's certainly something that I know myself educators are talking about, and hearing kind of what you're saying about creative thinking and design thinking does seem to be something that I think people are kind of falling into accidentally, because maybe they just don't realize, you know, they're working collaboratively with people trying to figure this situation out. And I think it's great when we hear someone like you talking about this in a different discipline, that we can kind of join the dots with education and see how design and education, they're so closely linked that it just seems so obvious to put them together. And I think that's really powerful in what you're displaying in your work here.
Yeah, what we found is, especially working with the Access office in Maynooth, they're already thinking like designers. So it's not this new thing that we're showing people. People who are doing this already are doing great work. They're empathizing, they're experimenting. The thing is, they're doing it maybe without some of the tools that we use and some of the kind of the structure and the framework. And so when you add that on top of already good practice, you start to see even more magical outputs.
Yeah. No, and that's great. And then, like, do you see that becoming more embedded, kind of like your role as a design thinker, kind of working more integrated in education, or how do you kind of see your kind of role developing?
Yeah, I think that my labs was set up as an experiment. So when we applied to the HEA, I was a little bit grumpy in the application, saying like I was, as an educator, I couldn't see enough change, and I saw opportunity. When we set up, very few people knew what we were on about, what we were thinking about. But even over a year, the amount of lecturers and staff members and students that have come on board wanting this, and the university itself is asking us to look at policy. It's looking at some very key strategic things, just because it's proving itself to be valuable. So there's an awful lot of work to be done, but yeah. I think everything we do is also going to be shared for the higher education community. Because I think it's critical.
Okay, well, again, I think collaboration can only happen from diverse disciplines, and it's great that we're kind of seeing diversity of staff really coming together to find common goals, because again, I just think diversity is the key. So whether that's in disabilities or in disciplines, it can only all kind of lead to, you know, kind of meeting people, understanding the end user at the end of the day, and everyone kind of getting something out of what they're working on in the end.
Yeah. And that double diamond just acts as a nice conduit. It brings people along with it, rather than putting lots of diverse people in a room. When you have a structure like that, you can actually guide them towards something, which makes it a little bit easier to work.
Brilliant. Okay, and actually, can I ask Christine to just come online for a second, because Christine has probably been keeping an eye on kind of Q&A, and hello.
Hi.
Welcome.
Yeah, that was brilliant. I have to say, thank you so much, Trevor and other Trevor. That was absolutely fantastic. I just love listening to the conversation. Now, we might just open it up actually at the moment, if that's okay. Because I think there was a lot of people reflecting kind of throughout. I know Mary Stokes has a really good point there where she says about adult guidance, that we need to look at this in relation to supporting an adult guidance strategy, kind of going forward, maybe kind of as part of this process. I think there was some other couple of points in the chat there. If people want to use the Q&A, probably just encourage as many people to kind of raise a question directly to Trevor. There's something, lifelong learning, collaboration between sectors and sharing of good practice can be really challenging. Totally agree, Mary Stokes, totally agree.
And I see someone called Anne Heelan, who we might know in a head, is just putting in a comment here and there about design thinking.
Familiar. Yeah.
It's interesting. We got an email in Maynooth, and as did every department and every University saying something like, it would have been reckless to do what we've done, which is move every course online.
Okay.
The way we did, but maybe it was reckless not kind of being ready for this, or not trying out these things. And sometimes we're set in the ways we've always done things that stopped us being prepared. And that principle about intellectual humility, I think we're maybe a little bit too caught up in how we think education should work and how a university or an institute should work, that we're holding on to assumptions too long. And I suppose that's our goal, is to question those big assumptions and just park them for a little bit to let new ideas in.
Yep.
And that's going to be huge when we return after this.
Trevor, Anne Heelan has a question for you. So she just said, in your experience, what has worked to change minds or caution thinking by academics? And do you have any examples?
What has worked
to change minds?
So there's two core tools that we go to an awful lot. We use a thing called empathy mapping. And I never know what people are familiar with or not familiar with, so I'm going to presume people aren't familiar. So empathy mapping is a tool developed by a guy called Dave Gray, and it's very simple. It just allows you in one canvas to start putting yourself in the shoes of someone else. And so if we, for example, and we've done this, if we put an academic suddenly into the shoes of a student, and we ask that academic a few key questions around what are you seeing as that student? What look out through their eyes, and what can you see? And suddenly you start going, oh my God, I can see notifications from Moodle or from Blackboard coming in 24/7. I can see that I'm caring for someone at home, or I'm seeing the pile of work or the pressure my parents are putting me under. What can you hear? What are you thinking or feeling, and what are you doing? And it's amazing. Within 5 minutes, you're transported into that person's life. And so we call that empathy mapping. And I've seen academics kind of just fall over when they start thinking about it. And then the second one, which we use an awful lot, is experience mapping. So we think of the experience a student might be on. That could be any journey or any experience, from kind of deciding what course to do all the way to arriving in the institute, or going through a module, or even doing an assignment. And we break that into phases. So we might have 5 or 6 phases, and then we'll interview students in the room, and we'll ask them to walk us through that journey. And that journey is a journey of ups and downs, and it's quite shocking. The insight, and incredibly insightful. And what we say is, in the design process, is anything that lies under like a negative experience, there are moments where we can start designing them up towards a positive experience.
Well, Trevor, all I'm hearing is that you're going to submit an idea for a workshop for next year's AHEAD face-to-face conference, and it's going to be about empathy mapping to support UGL thinking. So best luck with that paper. We're already biased. We're already totally biased. I'm looking forward to it already. Because I just think, that design thinking is so powerful and complements, supporting students with disabilities. So we might just move on to the next person. And that is Hannah Kelly. So Trevor, thank you very much. Can I ask you to turn off your camera and your mic? And Hannah, and Hannah, can I ask you to turn on your camera and your mic? And that'll just happen now. Great. So Hannah is sharing her screen. So it just takes a few moments. So Hannah, your screen was there and it just slipped away. There we go.
It should be back now, yeah.
Yeah, it's back. Yeah, you can definitely see it. So Hannah,
great.
Welcome. So Hannah, can you just briefly introduce yourself just to the crowd, please?
I can. So hi everybody, thanks for coming along. My name is Hannah Kelly, and I'm the Get Ahead coordinator here at AHEAD. I've worked at AHEAD for about 3 years now. So my role really is supporting students in that transitional piece from 3rd level education into employment, graduate employment. So today I'm going to really take you through this project that AHEAD is a partner on, this European project. So the project itself is called International Mobility with Disabilities. It's a 2-year funded project from the Erasmus Plus Youth and Sport Agency, and the funding started in February 2019 and will end in January 2021. So we're about a little over halfway through the project now. I came into the project just this year, so before I know Anne Heelan is listening in. So Anne would have spearheaded the project at first, and I've taken over from her capable hands. So see what I've done with it in the meantime. So yeah, so basically the main aim of the project was to create this accessible information platform for youth with disabilities on all stages of mobility. So from that, deciding to go on an international mobility all the way up to coming back and that evaluation piece as well. But it also has a section of the project that allows youth structures and youth workers a better understanding of the challenges and the barriers faced by youth with disabilities when they're undertaking mobility programs. And that kind of is all encapsulated on an online accessible platform, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So there's 6 project partners in this project. ESN France, it coordinates the project, and then we have other partners from France, Croatia, Austria, and Germany, and of course ourselves from Ireland. The project objectives, as I've mentioned before, the online platform is the main objective for the project, and it's to be used by youth with disabilities as well as their families, youth organisations, anyone kind of that has an interest in that area. The second then objective is the toolkit, and that's specifically for youth workers who are supporting youth with disabilities. So a little bit about supporting those, maybe someone who's never met a young person with a disability, or maybe never supported a young person with a disability on a mobility programme, a kind of a toolkit for those. And then there's 2 research elements as well. The first being a research on short mobilities, and that really came about when we look at the Erasmus Plus national agency data on the participation of youth with disabilities in international mobility programs. It's quite low, so that piece of research is really looking at shorter term mobilities as an option, maybe a more accessible option, and we'll have a look at some of the findings that we had from that research a little bit later. And then the final piece then is the research on best practices, so on welcoming youth with disabilities, and how different organisations or programmes have connected with young people, engaged with them and supported them through their programmes. So I kind of touched on what we'll cover on this presentation. Obviously it's hard enough to cover a whole European 2-year project in 20 minutes, so we'll do our best to kind of get some key elements from it anyway. And I think maybe it's a bit nice that we're focusing on something about international mobility. Hopefully there'll be a time in the future soon when that all gets back to normal and people are back on these programs. So yeah, we'll look first at a survey and a focus group as part of the research on short mobilities, and that looks at the student experience of study abroad and some insights and kind of advice around that. Then we'll look at a training report from a training opportunity we had in Zagreb for youth and youth workers, and then finally we'll have a look at the online platform, a kind of first look at how that looks on the first draft of it. So to get into the focus group, so some background: this focus group took place in Dublin, and there was 8 students there. So some were from Ireland who either had gone on a study abroad opportunity or who were interested in going on one, and then also there was some students there who were currently on an international mobility programme within Ireland themselves. The disabilities, we had a mix of disabilities in that focus group. We had one blind attendee, one who was deaf, some with ongoing health issues, and then some with specific learning difficulties like dyslexia. So we first kind of spoke about the barriers that students felt they had faced, or that others that they knew with disabilities had faced when studying abroad, or the idea of studying abroad. And the things that came up there was lack of accessible information, so the supports, the process itself, so lack of information on how that process worked, even eligibility criteria, so knowing whether or not that program was the right fit for them or not, and then information prior to actually going on the mobility around what disability sports they could expect to avail of in that country. As well as that, there was a lack of awareness of opportunity, so they had got to that stage in their study where international mobility was an option, and it was almost too late by the time they found out that it was an option, so they didn't know that those programs were available to them. Students also felt that sometimes there was a lack of respect, and that in particular there was one example where one student was asked to provide medical evidence in a host college so that she could access reasonable accommodations, whereas she would have already provided that information in her home university, but that she felt like there was a lack of respect, a lack of trust there from her host university, and then also a lack of support systems. So they felt that students really had a huge responsibility themselves to arrange their supports, and there wasn't great communication between sending and host institutions, whether from the disability office, there was no kind of communication between the two on supports, and that there was no agreements on an institutional level about universal support, and then a lack on clarity of financing, so arranging that was maybe a little bit confusing. And we asked the students to kind of come up with some recommendations on how they would address these barriers, what things they felt that could be put in place to try and address them. The first being clarity and responsibility from sending and host institutions, so that everyone kind of knew what they were responsible for looking after, and that the students themselves then knew who they had to go to with a problem, whether it was their host or their home university. So the next thing then was that they wanted clarity on what they themselves were responsible for in advance. In particular, there was one student who was deaf who had arranged his own ISL or his own sign language interpreters abroad while he was studying internationally, and obviously that's a huge undertaking for a student to do themselves, and he wasn't aware until he was kind of in that position that would have been his responsibility, and only that he had those connections to other deaf people in that country that he was able to get that done. So some clarity around that being a factor that you had to consider. They'd also recommended that it would be great to have collaboration between Disability Office and Erasmus Office, so that things like reasonable accommodations could be communicated to the host universities or colleges before they got there. They come up with the idea of a portal page with supports available, so a list of maybe what typical supports were offered in universities that they were going to, and information on disability support officers, so their name, contacts and stuff like that. And there was a lot of talk about the transitional period, the first couple of weeks, couple of months, which is obviously going to be a challenging time for any student going on an international mobility, arranging their own timetables and getting used to the new culture and meeting new people, that kind of thing, and maybe there's language issues there as well. So they thought a liaison officer, a named liaison officer, would be a great idea here. And then finally, dissemination of and promotion of services and organisations that are available in different countries, so that they could contact them, like for example, that AHEAD would be highlighted to them if they were studying in Ireland, so they could contact us if they had any specific queries. Another part of this research was a survey that we did. This was disseminated through all the different partners of the project. We had 72, just a quick profile of the participants. So we had 72 people fill in the survey, and overwhelmingly about 94% of those were older than 20. And there was about a 50-50 split, so 48% had already gone on a study abroad opportunity, and others maybe either had considered it or had ruled it out as an option. So this survey, some of the questions that we asked, so the one we'll focus on now is the factors that impacted students' decisions to study abroad. So availability of information of opportunity. So like that was talked about in the focus group as well, 24% said that was an option, or that was a factor. And then availability of funding grants, 33% felt that was another factor. Some other factors that came up quite a lot were around travel restrictions on disability allowance, the want or maybe even the worry of having to learn a new language. And then a lot, kind of reoccurring theme that came up was around safety and mobility, around navigating new environments. The rationale for studying abroad. These were the kind of things that students felt this would make them want to go on a study abroad opportunity, and that was around housing being available, there being availability of funding grants, and I suppose information around those grants, disability supports and host institutions, so knowing what those are, accessible hosting institution, and then there was a lot of mention of students feeling it would benefit their study and further benefit their career then once on graduation. Rationales then for not studying abroad, so things that would stop the students from pursuing a study abroad opportunity. About almost half, so 44% said that personal reasons, including family, was a reason why they wouldn't choose to study abroad. And then as well, there was about a quarter felt that they were concerned about change, about experiencing something completely out of their comfort zone was something that would also stop them from studying abroad. Then other factors that came up quite a lot were around financing, difficulty arranging home support or arranging healthcare in a foreign country. And then a couple of times people mentioned about how they were uncertain how it would impact their own health. So that's kind of a snapshot of that kind of research, a very quick run through of that research. And I'll talk a little bit now about our training opportunity in Zagreb. So Samizli, our Croatian partner, hosted us, and it's funny to think that this was only 2 months ago now that we were in sunny Zagreb, right before Corona changed all of our lives, I think. So yeah, the main objective from this training was to gather people from different backgrounds and experiences and discuss international mobility and how we could make that more inclusive. As it was halfway through the project, it was also a really good opportunity for us to assess and get some feedback on what we have done in the project so far, and even on elements that we hadn't started on yet, and get some insight into those from a youth perspective. So we had 15 participants in that training, 8 youth workers and then 7 youth with disabilities. And we, throughout the workshop, how we got that kind of feedback was we had workshops throughout the 5-day training, and we'll look at 2 of those workshops that we did now and a quick kind of overview of what we got from those. So one of the workshops that we looked at was the criteria for hosting structures. And in this workshop, participants were asked to share their own experience of mobility programs and what their needs were from hosting structures, and some of those needs that are some of the barriers really that they talked about in this workshop were maybe out of hosting structures control, like inaccessible buildings or transport systems in that country being inaccessible. But there was some solutions that, or some barriers that they could address themselves. So the first was lack of information, which again is kind of echoed from the focus group around accommodation or transport solutions. A lack of support, or even some felt they were discouraged to go on an international mobility because of the lack of support. And then personal assistance was a big thing throughout the whole training opportunity really, that grants sometimes didn't fully cover an international mobility, whether it be a short youth exchange or a longer term mobility as well. And the youth with disabilities who were at this training came up with some solutions of what they thought youth structures could do to make them feel better supported. A lot of this was more information prior to arrival about accessibility, and for that particularly to be given with enough time so that young people could plan appropriately for the supports that they would need. And then essentially the big takeaway there was that they wanted to feel, the young people there wanted to feel like they were being listened to and that their needs were being understood. The next workshop that we'll look at, so the final workshop we'll look at from this training, was the information on the online platform. So we really wanted to get insight from the platform, seeing as it is the biggest output from this project, on what the young people felt like needed to be on there. So the kind of outcome of this workshop was to define elements for the platform based off the participants' own experience of international mobility. So what they felt needed to be included or needed information on the platform was around it, and some of these we were able to incorporate. Others we feel like there was such a wealth of information on that training that we could almost do 3 or 4 other projects off the back of it. So some of the things that they would like to see on the platform were accessible transportation, so information on international and national levels of accessible transport. Testimonials was a big thing, so around peer-to-peer experience sharing. So they wanted to see maybe someone who had gone on the same international mobility that they're thinking about going on, and their experiences and tips and stuff like that. They also wanted some information on what to expect from sending and host organisations, and how really to ask these institutions for the accommodations or whatever it might be that you're looking for. They also thought it was important to include some stuff on social elements, in particular how to find accessible activities or local organisations that can point you in the right direction. And then also tools to promote learnings from international mobility. So once you've kind of returned back home, how you can kind of take that learning and do something with it, I suppose. So the platform is the biggest output. And I'll talk a little bit about that now. And we actually, the first draft of this platform launched yesterday, so I was scrambling to put the last few slides together so that I could give you a first look at the platform itself. And basically it has 2 targets. The first is to inform young people with disabilities of the opportunities that are available to them, and a bit of advice around how to get ready for every stage of the mobility programme. So in preparation, once they're on that mobility, and then the coming back on the evaluation kind of piece there. And the second then was to raise awareness and give practical tools for anyone who was in charge of supporting young people with disabilities. So that could be anyone who, an interested party and anyone, so it could be youth workers, university staff members, host and instruct staff members, local organisations, anything like that. So you'll see on the left there, there's just a screen grab of the platform, what it looks like when on the landing page. And as I said, this is the first version, and there's many more sections of the website to be updated. There will be a map with contacts in each country. So like that was kind of mentioned both in the focus group and in the surveys, that they wanted, young people wanted the ability to contact local organisations in order to get further information or whatever the case may be. There'll also be a section for youth workers, which I talked about at the start, that toolkit element, so that will also be added on. And then a forum where people can exchange experiences or tips or their own, you know, experiences of a programme, and that kind of covers that peer-to-peer piece that young people were looking for. So here is just kind of a quick screen grab of what of some of the stuff that's already on the platform. You'll see there on the left hand side there's a section on getting ready to go abroad, and then on the right hand side there's a section on discovering reasons why you should go on an international mobility, so kind of encouraging students and young people with disabilities to think about it as an option. So that's that one, and that's kind of as much as the platform we have done at the minute. We would love for anyone who's interested to have a look at the platform in your own time, to go and visit that website and give us some feedback on the content and the overall accessibility and what you think of it so far, and maybe your own inputs of what you think could be valuable. If you go onto the website, so the web address is mobility-with-disabilities.org. And there's a section at the end there where you can give your feedback there, or if you'd rather contact me directly, you can at my email, which is hannah.kelly@ahead.ie. So I know that was super fast, and I've covered an awful lot in that 20 minutes. But
Hannah, you did perfectly. Actually, the alarm just went about 20 seconds ago. So
there
I
you
mean, it
go.
could not have been more ideal. I know. Thank you very much. Well, actually, we might put the link as well to that website in the chat. So if you have the link
can do,
handy
yeah.
there, brilliant. Yeah, just so people can just copy and paste it into their browser. And I have to say, I just learned an awful lot about that, and it kind of got me thinking about Erasmus coordinators, who one of which who I know in higher education, and I think that idea of supporting disability students, especially in those Erasmus programs, is so important because Erasmus is so embedded in particular programs, that it just seems like something that everyone should try and do at least once. And I thought that was really interesting about the barriers of what is perceived as barriers for Erasmus programs as well, because like I have to say, I allowed those barriers myself to stop me from going on an Erasmus experience. So I definitely think for students with disabilities, there would be that added kind of awareness about barriers.
Yeah, I think a lot of the students at that kind of focus group that we had in Dublin spoke on how they felt like it just never was communicated to them as an option. So they felt themselves as students with disabilities, it wasn't for them. So it wasn't something that had ever come up in conversations with anyone. No one had approached them about this, the idea of an international mobility. So it just felt a step too far away, almost.
Okay. And then, so where do you see this program kind of developing in this awareness? Like,
yeah, so that's a great question, Trevor. We have a couple of months left before well, we have until January of next year to kind of finish that up. So at the minute, we're working on the toolkit element, so for the youth workers and youth organisations, and I think that's going to be quite a beneficial piece as well, because that could be helping people who already have these international mobility programs who maybe have just not thought about accessibility, so it's just not been in their kind of psyche yet, and we'll be giving them kind of some resources on how to start making their programs a little bit more accessible, and how to include all different types of young people in those programs. So and at that stage, once we have more of a, like, the website is at really first, like I said, it just launched yesterday, so it has a lot more content to go on it, and then at that stage we'll be disseminating it with other people and asking for some feedback on that too.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems so logical to do it because a student would be making the decision to go on Erasmus maybe even like a few weeks or months before they actually go. So then there's all that time between, like,
and that can even be a lot. It can even be a lot more time that a student with a disability will need in order to prepare for that Erasmus program or any other mobility program that they're interested in. While it might take a couple of months for any other student to organize that, because it is a big thing to organize. Someone who maybe has some healthcare that they have to organize, or has to be a little bit more creative around how to make it work, or has a lot more research to do on the accessibility of that country, it can take a lot longer even than it might take a different student to prepare for an international mobility.
And I'm just even thinking, like, maybe a student with like physical disability, at least then with the heads up for the university they're going to go to, then like timetabling can be considered, that student would have classes like on the ground floor as opposed to inaccessible spaces. So I mean, it can only help the institution and the student in the long term to have these kind of positive experiences abroad. Okay, so I might just ask Christine to just come online. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I feel like it's a team meeting here. We're all ahead.
Know. There's a lot of questions here. I just want to maybe just go through one or two, if that's okay. So Mary Stokes had a question basically asking, as part of this project, if you had linked in with the adult guidance services in Ireland. She was saying that Euro guidance supports work throughout Europe, and that the NCGE are the hosts of that, and work with Liedtka in terms of providing, you know, a campaign that's worked quite well, and they've seen similar issues through their campaigns. So she was just wondering, have adult guidance bodies been kind of included in the collaboration?
That's almost the next step of the project, where it will go. So in that training opportunity in Zagreb, the project partners met and we came up with some sort of a communication plan and stuff like that. So that'll be next steps. So once we have more of the outputs, first drafts, I suppose, put together and on that platform, we'll be sharing that with any kind of interested party, including, so we will have a huge list of people that we'll be contacting in the different partner countries, and asking them for their feedback or their kind of insights into it at that stage.
Oh, perfect. And I'm sorry, Mary has just very correctly corrected me. It's actually, the pronunciation is Eurodesk. So yeah. I've just read that wrong. So apologies, Eurodesk. If you want to link in with them, she's offered for maybe you to link in with her as the next stage of the project. And then if I could also just say, Frederick Fauvet has also wondered if, when looking at the higher education project, if you looked at kind of the silos created maybe between like communication and collaboration issues between disability services and international support services, so anyone that's supporting international student mobility with like on campuses.
Yeah, so that was actually something that came up in the focus group quite a lot, was that there seemed to be just a lack of communication between the two offices. They were completely separate. So it's something that I suppose the project has so many different target audiences that it would include both Erasmus offices themselves, as well as, and it doesn't just, this project doesn't just cover Erasmus as in a higher level space, it also covers any international mobility programs. So that's kind of that toolkit element is really where that will come in, where we'll be sharing, hopefully sharing, and that the advice from students from that focus group will be there, that there should be more collaboration and communication, open communication between different offices that have kind of a stake in the mobility programs.
Great. I'm just also just going to just draw your attention to as well, there was just one kind of thing that just came up as well in the chat by a lady called Lindsay. So she basically said that you know, like she really enjoyed the presentation, and that some of the key barriers that she kind of found as somebody with a disability that's a non-EU student on a mobility, that there was kind of key barriers that she found kind of in Ireland, in particular, I suppose the healthcare system, that she was subject to a waiting period. She didn't qualify for a medical card, and has a long-term illness. So, you know, having kind of being a non-EU student, she was wondering if that was something that maybe came out of your focus group, or something that's going to be looked
at. Actually, interestingly enough, we did actually have a student who was at that focus group, who was, I think, American, but was a non-EU student, who shared their experiences of kind of very much similar to arranging healthcare in Ireland, and it was a huge barrier, and something that like almost meant that that person did not want to go on an international mobility, because you know, that's a huge thing, and it's very important for someone. And a lot of the time the difficulty is not only arranging that healthcare, but the fact that you have to land here before you can start any plans to make that happen. So yeah, it's definitely something that's been inputted into the project and is included in some of the more detailed report from the focus group, but it did come up as an issue in particular for non-EU students.
Okay, and Trevor, do I have time just to slip in another quick comment? Is that okay? Okay, great. Okay, and just as well as that, Hannah, I suppose there's a lot of people giving a lot of love to you there in the chat and Twitter and everything like for the project, which is great, and a lot of people saying that they're going to be linking in with you and have sent emails to support the project going forward. Barbara mentioned about how Lorraine is, you know, in ahead has done a lot of projects on the Erasmus website, and then Catherine Fox said, had you considered looking at the EC Vet toolkit resources?
No, I haven't. I don't know. I haven't personally, but that might be not my role in this project, if you know what I mean. But it's definitely those are almost next steps. So the once we get the last few bits into the toolkit, Once we get those last few elements all together and on the website, that's when we'll be really trying to disseminate that information. And it's almost not a final draft at that stage, but it's disseminating that information and asking, is this meeting the needs that maybe you have? Is this something that you've thought about before? And then from there, asking for maybe some changes or something that we need, and inputting them into the projects as we go forward.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Hannah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Can't hear you, Trevor. You're on mic. You're
Good. Oh, brilliant.
there. You
Woo!
go. Okay.
Yes. So our final presentation is just going to come online now, and that's our two presenters, all away from across the seas, and that's Dr. Suzanne Ehrlich and Michelle Bartlett from the University of North Florida. So I think, Suzanne, are you presenting on your own for this, or is Michelle?
Michelle will be joining me as well.
Michelle will be joining you as well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So what I might do, I might just ask you just to introduce yourself. And Suzanne, will you introduce yourself first? And Michelle, will you introduce yourself afterwards?
Sure.
Cool.
So, and it's part of our presentation, actually. So,
okay. Oh, will we just go
that's
straight
all
to the
right.
presentation? Yeah, let's go straight to the
kind of did that
presentation.
kind of thematic kind of breakdown, and
20,
so I might just jump in, if that's all right.
Brilliant stuff. So it's about 20 minutes, and when the 20 minutes is up, I'll just kind of show my video. But in the meantime, I will disappear. Okay.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful.
And best of luck.
Thank you. So I'll jump to the slide. I am Dr. Suzanne Ehrlich, and I'm not sure why it doesn't say Dr. Michelle Bartlett. It should, because Michelle is also Dr. Bartlett. I'm very excited to work with her. We've been working on a few projects together. This is a new area of interest and on some levels, but not in other ways in terms of our work. Starting with myself, I am Suzanne Ehrlich from University of North Florida. I've been in the field of instructional design and more so workplace training and development lately, and my background specific to how I'm often asked by my students, how did I get into, if you will, my interest in universal design for learning is I'm actually a certified sign language interpreter, and I have been interpreting for almost 20 years. So working with diverse students and diverse populations for some time, especially in my interest in developing curricula in different spaces and places, has motivated my interest here. And I'll bop it to you, Dr. Bartlett.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am Michelle Bartlett, and I am faculty at North Carolina State University. I'm the director of an online master's degree in training and development, where I teach advanced instructional design and research methods. And I also teach in our doctoral program. I teach leadership, change management, and methods. Also the editor of the Career and Tech Ed Research Journal. So today we're going to quickly go through just a quick overview of mindset, and then kind of overlapping that with UDL and what is a UDL mindset, and then how do we place that UDL mindset into the workplace.
So part of our work together is looking broadly at areas of interest in particular to how mindset develops, and what's popular in many conversations, most of you may already know, is the moving from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. But we actually expand on this concept in this presentation, in its application, as Michelle has highlighted, on its relationship to our thinking around developing mindset in relationship to universal design for learning, moving from a often proactive, a reactive to proactive mindset strategies. A phrase that I use often with a colleague, not Michelle, but another, we haven't decided if it's a great phrase or not, but it comes up in the conversations regularly, is why do the minimum when you could do the maximum? In terms of, I think about it in the realm of design thinking, in the realm of curriculum development, and in students support services, even on our campus, that when we're looking for the best, and not everything can always be the best and 100%, but if you know that there's more opportunity, why not pursue that? So with our kind of framework of the UDL mindset, one particular author, Abringer, and I don't know if Abringer, do you know how to say it, Michelle? I'm always struggling with that name.
It's Arbinger.
Arbinger, thank you. Outward mindset. I give an example from his book on the outward mindset that I think is very interesting, and that he gives this outline at the very beginning of his text talking about developing an outward mindset, where he worked with SWAT teams, and I should, culturally speaking, SWAT teams for us are I would imagine, and not everywhere the same, those that go in and might have to do a raid on a particular home or building, and do so quickly and rapidly. And with this team, they were going in and they were destroying a lot of the environment that they were entering, and oftentimes there were children, maybe even infants, that were part of that experience. And one of his SWAT team members said, I have this idea that when we go in, what if one of us is actually charged with identifying these children, especially the infants, and giving them a bottle while all of this is happening, so as to, not that you can necessarily mitigate trauma, but think about the other people who are in that environment. And that is a really quick snapshot, based on time here, on the idea that there are all these elements that are taking place and challenges that occur, but that there are opportunities within even the chaos to find ways to think of others and look outward as some of those events are happening within the surroundings. So that leads to the awareness aspect of mindset. I teach an online course, Universal Design for Learning, at University of North Florida. And I would say that we spend multiple modules on just developing awareness alone. And I am in the 10th or 11th week at this time, where students have only moved into the space of if you will, foundational understanding in terms of its potential and application, meaning Universal Design for Learning application integration, that it doesn't lend necessarily immediately to application. They want to move into the action space without starting in the thinking space. And so we work to develop common language during that time, so that we are, kind of sharing those experiences with common language. But also, we talk about it in terms of beliefs and assumptions. Of course, with cognitive dissonance, working with, in particular, groups who are, advocating and actively engaged in designing and developing and improving processes and supports for diverse learners, means that sometimes there is that, I've been doing so much, what do you mean I'm not doing the maximum? And then we kind of, examine I call them cousins, but the two in terms of accessibility versus universal design for learning. Because when we talk about universal design for learning, in specific for us in workplace training and development in the workplace, often the conversation has led to accessibility, and we're trying to shift or at least identify through that common language how those two differ. So we have this, this is an older, it probably should be revised, and there's a text in the PowerPoint that you received. There's actually a text breakdown of this particular image. And it really just is I think when we're trying to work toward, identifying what those differences might look like in terms of accessibility versus UDL. I think it's, the field is rapidly changing, and see more and more, overlap, of course, but again, it gets into the, proactive and reactive mindsets when it comes to accessibility versus UDL. Michelle.
Yes. So we really see this UDL mindset at work as a spectrum. It's a spectrum from just understanding first initially that UDL is important, and then along the way building up to UDL is important and has been successfully implemented. And if you find yourself kind of in the area of not knowing where to start, so you have bought into this great concept of the UDL framework, but you're not really sure how to start implementing it, I would just say take a baby step and adopt one thing into your practice. And when that becomes comfortable, you add another. And so we know it's really important for the people that we work with to have common goals, and using a UDL mindset can really help you find solutions among people with differing opinions if the goal is agreed upon. And then linking back to our first presentation with Trevor discussing design thinking, I'm really thinking about how empathy leads to innovation. And with design thinking, you collect stories of the user and use that to help you solve problems. And so having a UDL mindset is very similar. So you design for your users, in our case, the students, with them in mind. And that really provides a great opportunity for innovation.
Hello. Are we still okay with sound?
I am. Are you good?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. I had a slide issue there, but I didn't know. So with stories from our workplace, and so because we're rooted in, I think I see a lot of threads of voice from others in terms of a collective understanding. When we deliver this presentation, it is our goal oftentimes to have, we in a great space, had we been together, had an opportunity for shared, platform for shared stories from our workplace. So instead, we're looking at what those particular ideas are from our own workplace. They might be around shift in accessibility, maybe stories of shift in design, and innovations that come as a result of implementation and support for universal design for learning in the workplace. Michelle wants to jump in on this slide before I go.
I'm good to go.
Alrighty, moving on. I keep hitting the wrong button. I think is the one. Yeah. Michelle.
All right, so barriers. So some of the barriers that we deal with on a daily basis in the workplace, whether we're implementing a UDL mindset or not, are design. So is the solution that you're considering designed in a way that aligns with the UDL principles? And how do we get others to buy in to that change, right? Change is difficult. Also technology. So is the technology that you're using, does it work for everyone? And time. So we often hear UDL is great, but it just takes so much time. But then you really have to consider kind of this reactive versus proactive. And given our time barriers today, we will not be going into that too much into detail, but I would really like, Suzanne, for you to share. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. But as far as technology and design as a barrier, if you could just share your story about MyThread.
Sure. So you can tell I'm hitting buttons, and I get excited to go find the mute button. And speaking of technology challenges, I think it fits. Always, I joke that if you work with technology, you just expect the bumps along the way. So I have shared that I am a certified sign language interpreter, and my other hat in my other life, I was an interpreter educator for quite a long time, and worked and still continue to in my work within the deaf community. And in that, one of the tools that I use, some of you may be familiar with VoiceThread, which is a e-learning tool that provides multiple means of engagement and is asynchronous, using it at different times where you can post interactive comments and discussion, even manipulatives with doodling and so forth. Gallaudet University, the deaf university in Washington, D.C., had approached VoiceThread, and this is where people ask, well, what does that look like? I want to know what, kind of mindset, a shift in mindset might look like in terms and in action. Gallaudet University approached VoiceThread and culturally said, we can't use a tool on campus that's called VoiceThread. We use American Sign Language to communicate, and or signed languages. They have international population as well, but primarily American Sign Language. And we'd like to use this tool. We think it'll be great in terms of interactivity and accessibility. What can we do? And VoiceThread actually renamed specifically for Gallaudet University their tool MyThread. So it's not known as MyThread, or a voice thread on Gallaudet University's campus is in fact known as MyThread, as a way of, you know, the embedded nature of just when I talk about that common language and lexicon, and building mindset into practice. You see that thread of support from shifts such as that.
Thank you. And one last barrier, documentation. So we all have policies and boundaries that we work within in our workplace. So if the policies within that organization don't really align or support UDL implementation within that organization, for example, if your documentation at your workplace doesn't include an inclusionary tone, you may want to start with revisiting your mission and vision statement to see if the UDL mindset is visible, and if not, perhaps that's the best place to start, kind of that foundational policy in which practices are built upon.
All right. Oh, I'm on again. I don't know if my screen keeps popping up and down. So because I think I'm the leader in terms of the screen sharing. So successes in terms of the opportunity to replicate, collaborate, and educate really becomes, and I've learned a great deal from this being the 4th iteration of my Universal Design for Learning class, where much of their projects are community rooted and authentic in terms of their settings, and watching that very personalized approach to is often quite challenging, both in building their knowledge base around the potential for Universal Design for Learning within organizations, but also moving from the, you know, singular perspective to how does that look like from a collective, and moving into authentic projects that you know, really build upon that idea, and then moving wider to a system-wide change. And that loops back even to what Michelle was just talking about in terms of documentation, all the way to delivery. And one example is something as simple as, and this is where accessibility and Universal Design for Learning kind of merge. I had a student who was delivering trainings and was looking at their system of delivery, and they have a large deaf population, only to discover that the large population of attendees who are deaf and use American Sign Language to communicate, and even the captioning feature that she discovered about their delivery system only captions after, not during. And what that means is that when we don't caption during, that means that those who would like to access during live interactive are only given the choice to do asynchronous participation, and because of their system. And as a result, brought it to her administration, was able to make that system-wide change that now really supports not just those particular attendees, but all attendees who might need that accessibility feature. But as a form of thinking about a larger application and support for diverse learners in her setting. Okay, so had we been together, we were really excited about the opportunity to look at these questions. I think that these questions really pose an opportunity to, and we were looking at, for us, I have a lot of thoughts going on at the same time. For us, we're looking at organizational, and I think, so I'm even thinking about Trevor's presentation around systems and how systems either support or hinder that progress. And so for us, I think we look at and have had discussions around how do those systems, whether it be higher education, or more specifically for us in the workplace, because we know that learners are going to go through a system from K through 16. I know that we have different terminology for it, but moving from, say, a elementary, secondary, and to post-secondary experience, those particular learners will then also enter the workforce, and how the two units find synthesis, hopefully in time to come, around you know, supporting learners. I do think, and we both think, Universal Design for Learning has great potential to support that. So some of those concepts here, my students on the left-hand side could be shifted to my students can't, to what talent do my students or colleagues contribute? So some of the language here, if you can read through these slides, you know, they aren't able to. How can I improve pathways for solutions? What resources are available? I don't know how to help. Who can I reach out for support, and where can I learn more? They seem angry or unhappy, and how can I make an inviting and safe environment as an opportunity for shifting mindset? So we would have had a great activity, and we actually have, if we'd had more time, you would use this QR code and you would jump into a Padlet where we would exchange ideas, and of course you're welcome to still do that if you like, around this particular concept and how you're employing, or maybe how you've identified you know, barriers, or perhaps even solutions to building those bridges within the workplace.
Well, Suzanne, just
Yes.
just interrupt just briefly. Actually, do you
Yes.
want to pose that question to people and they
Yeah.
can type in the box?
I would love it.
Yeah.
I would love it. We would love it. I'm pushing the wrong button again, and I'm back again. I really have worked with technology for almost 20, you know, a long, long time. So yeah, so here's our, if you would like to, in the, I think if I move to the chat feature, then you all see that I moved to the chat feature. Is that correct? So I'm trying not to open the chat feature from my end, but because I'm not sure what's visible to you. But it would be great to know from the group. Michelle, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Should we open
So-
the dot storming so we can ask the question to the group? That
Yeah.
is
So what first question do you want to pose to them?
So I would like to look at the first, I was trying to, do you see when I open the Q&A, does that pop up on your screen too? I'm trying
Well,
to
we can
close it.
read out the Q&A to you.
Okay, and I'm trying to close it, and now I cannot. Let me go and just note, and I just dismissed the question. So I should not be in charge of technology. Here we go. Yes, so the first one is, you know, I think let me read our first question is, applying UDL principles to the slides concept, what actions and specific changes have you observed in your own organization, if any? Yes.
So actions in an organizations that would have helped promote UDL, or just
I think we've seen both. We've seen individuals who may encounter the deficit mindset and have identified solutions to those, or might observe, say, more progressive approaches to making changes within an organization and applying UDL. Okay. So I think you could look at it two different ways, maybe more of a, you know, solutions to a challenge, or ways in which you resolve those. But actionable items, specific changes maybe that have been implemented, and then
because even some of those changes could be just small but still quite relevant. It could be about just new relationships in the workplace, supporting students, because sometimes I find there can just be a gap in communications. Like, for example, where I worked, there was a really active and proactive career service who would support like all types of students, including disability students, with not only career advice, but with Erasmus advice and that. And even though like it would seem like really supportive and helpful, and was like, it was a great kind of creative element of their work to be so proactive about giving this advice to students with disabilities. So even in those kind of systems bit that you're talking about, like, would people have even, like, I suppose, supported and improved systems just through those incidental conversations where good work practices are developed?
And also too, this QR code works. I was testing if you saw me reaching up by chance. But also, what changes would you employ based on, you know, maybe some of the conversations that we're having today in terms of furthering that mindset within your organization? Because a lot of what we've talked about collectively with other groups and with our students and others is that I can't get my organization to adopt this particular strategy or idea or concept. And so we're trying to move that from doing back to, and similar to that, you know, spectrum that we looked at, that I know what UDL is, but I don't know how necessarily to implement it, is what is it? What is the it? And moving back to that space within the organizational structure in terms of discussion. Okay. Yeah.
So how have you implemented it? Like, you know, so do you exist in a bubble, or do you have a team that have all kind of buyed into this concept of UDL and then have made it a reality?
So I call this my UDL win of after a year and a half. And for me, it kind of highlights how I'm trying to, I don't want to be sneaky, but at my institution, at my institution, I was lucky enough to serve on the Faculty Enhancement Committee, which oversees a lot of the instructional aspects for faculty and support for faculty across the university. And we created a learning design committee, learning spaces design committee, and that committee was charged with identifying support solutions across campus for our physical environment in terms of the classroom. So my UDL win is getting UDL language into the mission in charge.
Wow.
So as we built the mission in charge, what that means is that now people who are part of that committee have to read it and understand what that means, which means and so that gets into that processes and documentation, that just by getting the language means that institutionally, if it's a charge, in theory, right? This gets back to the system things that Trevor's talking about.
Yeah.
But even getting the language, right, the lexicon built in means that there's a conversation happening. Well, what is UD and UDL? And what does that mean to us? What does that mean to this space? So starting the conversation, which means then, in essence, starting to chip away, or at least trying to shift that mindset to incorporating a universal design approach to learning within the campus and structure.
Because you're kind of hitting on a point that was brought up in our first week, which was like, how do you develop a community of practice? And do you start with people who are already on your side, or do you try to convince people who don't necessarily agree with you and spend lots of energy on those? So there seemed to be an idea that you kind of tried to start momentum and, team up with people who are already kind of in that idea that UDL is kind of a good way of going, and then try to, just express that work, and then that kind of helps buy in other people to it.
I think Michelle speaks about that a lot.
Michelle, probably not the nicest answer, but really sometimes you just have to trick them. And so I often feel like higher education is if multi-level marketing and the military had a baby. So there's all this bureaucracy and ranking and stuff. And so I lead a master's program in training and development, but I'm the lowest ranking member of 13 faculty that I direct that teach in this program. And getting them to adopt design principle changes in the courses and make them widespread throughout all of the courses is not very easy, because we rely very heavily on this ranking system, right? So I'm in charge in theory, but I still have to get this buy-in from people. And so I will often take the people who I know have, seen the light of my idea and create a mini task force group. And we will work together on making a change in 1 or 2 courses or 3 courses, depending on how many people I have on board. And then when they see the results, slowly other people say, oh, I want that in my course too. So, just showing them the results and using the classroom as a lab and doing some research and evaluation and some kind of return on investment of implementing that design principle into the course. Usually we'll get buy-in from people.
And I'm just wondering, how do you capture those results, and then how do you showcase them?
So I use my classrooms as labs all of the time. So if I change a discussion board, for example, I change a discussion board to be UDL friendly. Put those UDL principles into the assignment. Then I will capture through a Google form afterwards, hey, do a little evaluation through a Google form with the students. What did you learn? What did you like? How did this, all of these things. And then I'll do the same for the same form with the same discussion board the old way in the next module, and compare the two. And then at our faculty meeting, I'll say, hey, guess what? Because there's usually a sharing time of, does anybody have anything great to share to the group? And I'll say, yeah, I made this small change, and here are some voices, voices of the students, some quotes that they've said in these evaluation forms about how much more they got out of it, how, I don't normally participate because I'm not able to do XYZ, but because I had these 3 choices, now I felt for the first time I was able to really contribute to the group. And those kind of things. I mean, faculty, they come to work because they care about students and they care about impacting their lives. So if you can share how this change impacted a larger group of students, usually you're going to get more buy-in, and they're less afraid of the change if you show them the reward.
Yeah, because it sounds like what you're doing, like capturing evidence and then keeping that intervention evidence-based where they can see the wins of this intervention, just seems to be a good strategy about, like, getting other people on board. And actually what I might do, I might just ask our Christine to come back online, because she might have questions from the wider kind of community there. Hi.
Yeah, so there, how are you? So there is just some feedback there coming through. Just fantastic presentation. Thank you guys so much. I know Pauline Fagan, in response to looking at the area of UDL and shifting mindsets in everyone's institution, Pauline mentioned that within her subject department, they included a student-led variety of assessment instead of a prescribed assessment method. And then Marion McCarthy, she mentioned in UCC that the disability services work quite closely with the teaching and learning services, and they're using the teaching and learning form and AHEAD and UCD digital badge to help facilitate and open and embed that UDL thinking, I suppose, across campus there. So she was kind of saying that she's going to be leading and talking about that with Brian Butler later on in the webinar series. So she's really, really interested in this subject as well.
And I'm interested in hers because we're doing the same thing in terms of the UDL badge, which for us is on the faculty side of the house. So I think looking at Mary Stokes and her comment, about organizations and policy, it's as if there's really 3 units, and I think Friedrich even was talking about how those, not here, or like there was a comment somewhere, but how they're, that's woven in. It's not just faculty voice, it's not just organizational voice, but it's also that student piece too. And how is that? I think we're at the start of our discovery in terms of there is so much, and how do we organize that, right, then and capture it in terms of making some of that change from, threading it all together. Because I like the idea of poor policy. I think Mary had made a comment about that on poor policy and frustration. And I gave an example when we were talking that, I've worked with a group where we have 2 policies and an inclusion statement on a syllabus. And the frustration comes from one has this very strong legal and litigious tone, and then the other has a very welcoming and inclusion tone. And it really is almost becoming this divide in terms of approach. And whichever camp you're in, you feel very strongly about the other camp. So it's complicated, and I think Mary brings a good point.
And just to can we bring Hannah and Trevor back online if they're available, just so we can have everyone here. Hopefully Wi-Fi's and that will all cope well. So hi everyone, it's the gang, we're all united again. Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming back. Well, I have to say, just overall, I think all 3 presentations have had so much in common, just about practical implementation, whether that's from specific design thinking skills used to kind of facilitate kind of practical applications within education. And then of course Hannah's one just seems to be kind of like Trevor's is at one end of the scale, and then Hannah seems to be on the different end, where it's like design thinking is all materialized into that kind of Erasmus support that we've seen. And then what I love about kind of Suzanne's, Michelle's, you're kind of like in the middle, kind of like where you're thinking and implementing and evaluating and storing things. So I think it's great. We've kind of seen like all these different ends of implementation of UDL, and where we can kind of see beginnings and middles and ends too, which is great. And even continuing from those ends again, kind of like where Hannah's is going to go further again. So unless anyone has any questions, or maybe Yi as the panelist, do you have anything to offer, or kind of like even reactions to each other's presentations?
I know, yeah, sorry, just I was waiting to see if anybody else wanted to talk for a second. I know a great takeaway I got from Trevor from your presentation was around that empathy mapping piece, and it's something that I definitely think we could incorporate within the toolkit element of our project for the youth workers and youth organizations. So I think it's a great idea, so I'll definitely be bringing that up for the rest of the partners.
Great.
Brilliant.
And
yeah,
Trevor,
I guess it's what I always see. I always feel like an outsider because I guess I'm a generalist in nature. So I jump from medical device to education and kind of dip my toe in everything. And I think that's where I see the benefit of what we're doing. So pure design has a lot of things that will help educators. My thing is always our educators are designers. There's a famous quote by a guy called Tim Brown who says, "Design is too important to be left to designers." So for years, designers have kind of hoarded what they do and use it as a way of designing stuff. But now, even just to share empathy mapping, and there's so many other tools that I think people can implement in what they're doing.
brilliant.
More than happy to share anytime.
Yeah.
Great. No, thanks a lot.
I definitely think one thing that's come out for me, Trevor, and everybody else, is kind of that element of the learner center, that co-creation piece, and how important that is.
Yeah.
And kind of bringing everyone in, I suppose, is kind of, just to pick up on that point, is bringing everyone in as part of that design structure and building it in, embedding it from the get-go, I suppose, can be something, hopefully, as we rebuild something after all of this. It would be great to see what kind of nuggets of collaboration that we have here that can continue on, because it's so rich, and as well as to capture, it'd be great to build on it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I see it so often, we like, no matter how empathetic we feel as educators or as lecturers or whatever, I think we still miss really obvious stuff. Like I gave one example in a reply there that we worked with a course and they had a huge dropout rate and they had no idea why. But as soon as we put students in a room with them and brought them through empathy mapping and experience mapping, they quickly saw one was most of the students in there wanted to do a completely different course, didn't get it, so ended up in this one, which had a similar title. The next one was the course leaders were communicating completely wrong information about what the workload was going to be. But the biggest learning was the guys who were running the course were running it for so long, they expected today's students to be able to commit the same type of energy and efforts as 10 years ago, without realizing that now students have to work into the night to pay for the high rents in Dublin. And so they expected 8 hours of work per student per day. But the lecturers themselves were exhausted after only 6. Like they couldn't do an 8-hour day.
Yeah.
And that stuff becomes really clear when they're in the room together, working through, sharing that experience.
I will share I'm sorry, I'm a tool person. I am going to share, Rice University has a workload calculator. Have you seen it?
Nope.
It's been passed around with all of this on one of the networks, and they actually have this, a colleague of mine who has high expectations gives it decent reviews, and you put in all the course different types of assessments and work that you have for the course, and it actually does a calculation how much your students would have to study. So it actually is a workload calculator.
Oh, brilliant.
Which I'm kind of thinking about it from this perspective, right? In terms of, even mindset, like, do you understand what your students will have to do in order to do this? So I'll share that tool to share out to everybody.
Yeah, can you share that on Twitter as well using @Ahead of Ireland?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Brilliant. So because we're kind of just slightly going over time, so we might just have to kind of wrap up. I'm just going to share my screen and just kind of pass on just little bits of information just about kind of the next week's session. So I'd actually, oh no, we're well past that. So just to say about next week, so next Friday, we're here again at 2:30. So again, it's going to be a free webinar. So everyone is welcome. So please go to our webpage that I think has been posted a few times throughout the link. But if you go to ahead.ie, you'll find the link. And within that, you'll see 3 more presentations next week about UDL from both in Ireland and outside Ireland. And then we will see you then. So as always, please stay in touch using the hashtag Ahead2020 at Ireland Ahead as well. And so share resources, keep the conversation going.